Hello everyone, here is Afra Siab. Today we are going to solve Cambridge IGCSE Physics Paper 4 Theory Extended held on June 2017 and paper code is 0625 with variant 41. So let's start from question number 1. Here is question number 1. Figure 1.1 is the speed time graph for an ice skater. Part A. Explain what is meant by deceleration. So here we have to define the deceleration. Deceleration is basically the negative acceleration when we say that the velocity of a body decreasing with the passage of the time. Then this body has the negative acceleration. So we can also say in simple words that the body is slowing down. So I will write here deceleration means that body is slowing down. Next part B. Use figure 1.1 to determine part first. The distance travelled between t is equal to 3.0 second and t is equal to 6.0 second. So here we have to find out the distance and we are given the speed time graph. So basically the distance travelled is equal to the area under the graph. I write here distance travelled is equal to area under graph. Now we go back to figure and label time t equal to 3.0 second and t is equal to 6.0 second. So at this point it is 3.0 and it is given that 6.0 second is at this point. We also have to find out the corresponding values of the speed. So I use a ruler and draw a line here. So here we can see that I also draw a line here. At this point, speed is 11 meter per second and here is 5 meter per second. So basically there is a triangle, that is this region. I label this as region 1, while there is a second region which is a rectangle. So it is this one. And we have to find out the area of both of these regions. So the total area will be equal to the sum of area first plus sum of area second. I write here it will be equal to area 1 plus area 2. So first of all we calculate the area of this triangle. At this point it is 3.0 second and here is 6.0 and it's a triangle. The area of triangle will be half base, which is in this case time. 6 minus 3, it is 3.0, multiply by, here it is 11 and it's 5. So 11 minus 5 is 6. It is 6, which is the area of first region. We also have to find the area of second region. So it will be base multiply by height. In this case, the base is time, that is 3.0, multiply by height, that is 5 minus 0. So I multiply it with 5. This is for region 2. So I will write here, it is equal to 1 over 2, 3.0 multiply by 6 plus, here is 3.0 multiply by 5. So the distance will be equal to 9 plus 15, which is 24 meter. So this distance is equal to 24 meters. Going towards the next part. 2. The declaration between t is equal to 3.0 second and t is equal to 6.0 second. So here we have to find out the declaration. This is basically the negative acceleration, and we know that the slope of speed time graph gives us acceleration. I write here acceleration is equal to delta v over delta t, where I take any 2 points that is at 6.0 second and 3.0 second. It will be v2 minus v1 over t2 minus t1. Here I have to put the values. t2 is 6.0 minus t1 is 3.0. I also have to find out their corresponding values of speed. So going back to graph, we can see here that at time t is equal to 3.0 second, it is 11 meter per second, and at 6.0 second it is 5 meter per second. So first of all, second time is 6.0, that's why I write 5 minus 11. 5 minus 11 because it is also a declaration. So it will be equal to minus 2 meter per second square. The unit of acceleration is meter per second square, and this minus shows that there is a declaration, means that the speed of the body is decreasing with time. So I write here minus 2 meter per second square. Part C. First, state what happens to the size of declaration after t is equal to 6.0 seconds. So going back to graph, here is 6.0 second, and we can see that there is a curve after 6.0 second. So we have to explain that what happens to the declaration. So we can see here that the gradient decrease means that the body is slowing down rapidly. So I write here declaration will decrease because the gradient decreases. So declaration reduce. Part 2. State what happens to the resultant force of the scatter after t is equal to 6.0 seconds. So here what happened to the resultant force? According to Newton's second law, F is equal to ma, where mass is constant. And from part 1, we can see that acceleration is reduces. So when the acceleration decreases, force also decreases. So I write here force, that is resultant force, reduces. Question number 2. A footballer kicks a ball vertically upwards. Initially, the ball is stationary. Ball is stationary means that its initial velocity is equal to 0. That is Vi is equal to 0. Part A. His foot is in contact with the ball for 0.050 seconds. The average resultant force on the ball during this time is 180 Newton. The ball leaves his foot at 20 meter per second. Calculate part 1. The impulse of the force acting on the ball. Here we have to find out the impulse. For that we have to know that what is meant by impulse. Impulse is the product of force and time, and it is also equal to change in momentum. I write here impulse is represented by I and it is the product of force and time, which is also equal to change in momentum, mvf minus mvi. But in this data we are given force and time, so I use first formula that impulse is the product of force and time. So force is given 180 Newton while the time is given 0.050 second. So it will be this. And the value of impulse comes to be 9 Newton second. The unit of impulse is Newton second because force is measured in Newton and time in second. So I write here impulse is equal to 9 Newton second. Next part 2. The mass of the ball. Here we have to find out the mass of ball. So going back, I again use this formula that impulse is equal to change in momentum. I write here I is equal to mvf minus mvi. So here we have to find out the value of mass. So I separate the mass. It will be like this. So mass will be equal to I over Vf minus Vi, where impulse that we already calculate in first part 9 Newton second. I write here 9 over what is the final and initial velocity. So here ball is stationary means that initial velocity is equal to 0 and the final velocity is 20 meter per second. By putting these values here, 20 minus 0, it will be 9 over 20. So the value of mass comes to be 0.45 kilogram. I write here mass is equal to 0.45 kilogram. Part 3. The height to which the ball rises. Ignore air resistance. So here we have to ignore the air resistance and find out the height to which a ball can rise. So I use the formula that the kinetic energy that loss here will convert into the gravitational potential energy. So I write here kinetic energy will be gravitational potential energy because here we have ignored the air resistance. We know the formula of kinetic energy is equal to half mv square and gravitational potential energy is equal to mgh, where m is mass, g is acceleration due to gravity and h is height. We have to find out the value of h. This m cancels by this, so height comes to be v square over 2g. Here v is 20 meter per second square, meter per second over 2, and the value of g is 10 meter per second square. So I write here 10, so that the value of height comes to be 20 meter. So I write here height is equal to 20 meters. Part B. While the boat is in contact with the ball is no longer spherical. State the word used to describe the energy stored in the ball. So here shape is spherical. It means that the energy which associate here is actually elastic potential energy. So I write here it's elastic potential energy. Question number 3. Figure 3.1 shows remote sensing equipment on the surface of distant planet. There is a figure 3.1, you can see it. Part A. The mass of the equipment is 350 kg. The acceleration of a freely fall on the surface of this planet is 7.5 meter per second square. Part 1. State what is meant by term weight. So here we have to define what is weight. Weight is the force due to gravity acting on an object. So I write here weight is a force due to gravity acting on an object. Part 2. Calculate the weight of the equipment on the planet. So here we have to find out the value of weight. In the part A, we are given the value of mass and acceleration of freely fall body. So we know that weight is the product of mass and acceleration due to gravity. So mass is given whose value is 350 multiplied by the freely fall acceleration is 7.5 meter per second square. So the value of weight comes to be 2600 Newton. I write here 2600 Newtons. Part B. The equipment releases a balloon from a point that is a small distance above the surface of the planet. The atmosphere at the surface of this planet has a density of 0.35 kg per cubic meter. So here is the density of atmosphere. The inflated balloon has a mass of 80 gram and a volume of 0.30 meter cube. Make an appropriate calculation and then predict and explain the direction of any motion of the balloon. Show your working. So here we have to explain the direction of the motion of balloon. So for finding out the direction, we compare the densities. Density of the balloon with the density of the atmosphere. So if the density of balloon is less than the atmospheric density, then the balloon will float. I write here density of balloon is less than density of atmosphere, then it floats. And second condition is that if the density of balloon is larger as compared to the density of atmosphere, then the balloon will sink. I write here density of balloon is greater than atmospheric density, then it will sink. So we have used this concept here. First of all, the atmosphere at the surface of this planet has a density of 0.35 kg per meter cube. So here the density of atmosphere is given. I write here density of atmosphere is equal to 0.35 kilogram per meter cube. Now we have to find out the density of balloon also. Density of balloon will be equal to mass over volume. The mass of balloon is 80 gram and we have to convert this gram into kilogram. So what will I do? 80 divided by 1000. So that the value of mass comes to be 0.08 kilogram. So I write here 0.08 divided by volume is given, which is 0.30 meter cube. So the value of density of balloon comes to be 0.267 kilogram per meter cube. So by comparing these two densities, that is the value of density of atmosphere and the density of balloon, we see here that the density of balloon is smaller as compared to the density of atmosphere. I write here density of balloon is smaller than density of atmosphere here. First condition is satisfied, this one, that the density of balloon is smaller than the density of atmosphere, then the balloon will float. So in this case the density of balloon is smaller than the density of atmosphere, so the balloon will rise upward. So balloon rises. So here prediction is that the balloon will rise upward. And explanation is that because the density of balloon is smaller than the density of atmosphere. Question number 4, part A. A 240 volt 60 watt lamp is connected to a 240 volt supply. The lamp has a constant temperature. So the temperature of lamp is constant. It means that the temperature does not change. State part first, the rate at which the lamp transfer energy to the surrounding. So we have to state the rate at which the lamp transfer energy. So here we can see that the power is 60 watt, means that if the lamp is utilizing 60 watt of energy at constant temperature, that is given here, the temperature is constant, then there must be the 60 watt energy transferring. It means that the lamp utilizes 60 watt energy, then this 60 watt energy will transfer next when the temperature is constant. So the rate at which the lamp transfer energy will be equal to 60 watt. I write here 60 watt. Part 2. The names of the thermal processes by which the lamp transfers energy to the surrounding. So first of all, there is a lamp and the energy from the lamp is in the form of radiation. So there will be the radiation. and second one there will be the convection, that is due to the air currents. So these are the two methods by which the lamp transfer energy to the surrounding. One shows a thick copper block that has been heated to 400 degrees C. One side of the block is dull black. The other side of the block is polished and shiny. So here is a figure 4.1. We can see that there is a copper block and two thermometer A and thermometer B. So one side of this block is dull black surface. You can see from here that it's a dull black surface, while the other surface is polished shiny surface, this one. So the thermometer A is placed on the side of dull surface, while the thermometer B is placed on the polished shiny surface. In experiment 1, the thermometer bulbs are both painted black. They are placed at equal distances from the surface. Maximum temperature shown by each thermometer is recorded. Explain any difference between the maximum temperature shown by the two thermometers. So going back to figure, we can see here the one side is black, dull black, while the other is polished shiny surface. So the dull black surface is basically a best radiating energy. So it means that the energy radiation here will be larger, and the polished shiny surface there will be less radiated energy. It means that if there is large radiation of energy, the thermometer A will get more energy as compared to the thermometer B, because thermometer A is placed on the side of dull black surface. That's why its energy is longer, its energy is larger as compared to the thermometer B. So there will be the difference of temperature between both of these. I will write here, block is very hot and heat radiated from the surface. Dull black surfaces will emit more energy as radiation, because the energy that is emitted here is in the form of radiation. Then the shiny black surface. So the thermometer A will have high temperature, then B. Going towards the next part. Part 2. In experiment 2, the thermometer bulbs are both shiny silver colored. They are placed at the same distance from the surface of the block as in experiment 1. State and explain any differences that are observed in the maximum temperatures shown by the thermometers in experiment 1 and 2. The bulb of the thermometer are silver now, and silver is a better reflector of heat. I write here. So the bulb of the thermometer is silver now, and silver is a better reflector of radiated heat. Means that the bulb heat up less, so that in the experiment 2 the thermometer reading will be less as compared to the experiment 1. The bulbs of thermometer are silver now, silver is a better reflector. Of radiated heat. Means that the bulb heat up less. So in the experiment 2, thermometer reading will remain lower. Part C. Figure 4.2 shows a firefighter wearing shiny silvered colored clothing. State the benefit to a firefighter of wearing the shiny silver colored clothing. So the shiny silver color is basically good reflector, so that this color keeps the firefighter cooler, and the firefighter does not get too much heat. I write here as shiny silver color is a better reflector. So it keeps the firefighter cooler. Question number 5. Figure 5.1 shows some gas trapped in a metal cylinder by a piston. Here is a figure 5.1, and we can see that there is a metal cylinder. Inside this there is a gas, and there is also a piston here. Part A. The position of the piston is fixed. The cylinder is moved from a cooled room to a warm room. Explain in terms of molecules what happens to the pressure of the gas in the cylinder. So first of all, here we have to explain that what happens to the pressure in the cylinder. So we can see from here that the cylinder is moved from cooled room to warm room. I write here cooled room to warm room. It means that the temperature of cooled room is lower and the temperature of warm room is higher. So we can simply say that when the cylinder moves, the temperature increases. So temperature is directly proportional to the average kinetic energy. So the kinetic energy also increase, and kinetic energy is equal to half mv square, due to which the speed of molecules increases. So when the speed of molecules increases, the molecules collide with each other and with the wall of this piston, and also with the wall of this cylinder. In all directions they collide. So after every collision, they change their direction and they bounce back. So there will be the change in momentum. I write here collision and then change in momentum. And this change in momentum causes the force to exert on the metal cylinder. So there will be the force. The change in momentum increases, so the force also increases, and we know that pressure is equal to force over area. By increasing force, pressure also increases. So in this way, the pressure of the gas in the cylinder increases. I write here the temperature of the gas increases and so does the kinetic energy of the molecules. They collide with walls of container or cylinder, harder, and change direction. So when they change direction, there will be the change in momentum. This causes a large force. As pressure is equal to force over area. So walls of the cylinder experience greater pressure because here force is larger. So in this way, the pressure increases. Part B. The piston is now released. It moves to the right and finally stops. Explain these observations in terms of the pressure and the volume of the gas in the cylinder. So first of all, it moves towards the right. it means that piston moves in this direction so that the volume of the gas increases. And we know that volume and pressure are inversely proportional to each other. So when the volume of gas increases, the pressure will decrease. Initially, we can see from here that the pressure inside is larger as compared to the outside pressure. So when the piston stops, both of the pressure become equal. Inside pressure will be equal to outside pressure. So I write here, as the volume of gas increases, pressure of gas decrease. So the piston will stop only when the pressure inside the piston will become equal to the pressure outside the piston. So I write here, when piston stops moving, then pressure inside piston become equal to the pressure outside the piston. Question number 6, part A. A ray of light in glass is incident on a boundary with air. State what happens to the ray when the angle of incidence of the ray is, part first, less than the critical angle of the glass. So what will happen to the rays when the angle of incidence is less than the critical angle C? So there is a concept of total internal reflection. So if I consider that there is a glass block and ray of light is entering here at this point. First of all, I draw a normal here. So in this case, if the angle of incidence is smaller as compared to the critical angle, then it will goes out and change its direction. So there will be refraction. So I write here, the ray travels through the block into air and change its direction. So there will be the refraction. Ray travels through block into air and changes direction. Or we can simply write here that refraction. It's up to you. Part 2, greater than the critical angle of the glass. So, if the incident ray has the angle that is greater than critical angle, then what will happen? This ray will reflect back, so there will be no refraction. There will be totally internal reflection. So I write here, there will be total internal reflection. Part B, Figure 6.1 shows a ray of light incident on a glass block at point A. The critical angle of the glass is 41 degrees. Part first. On figure 6.1, without calculation, continue the ray of from point B until it leaves the glass block. So in figure 6.1, we can see that this is the incident ray and it falls at the point B. So first of all, I draw the normal line here. So this is the normal line to this surface. No, if the angle of incident is greater than the critical angle, then there will be total internal reflection. And second condition is that if the angle of incidence is smaller as compared to critical angle, then there will be refraction. So in figure 6.1, first of all, we have to find out the angle of incidence because the critical angle is given 41 degrees. So angle of incidence is basically the angle that the incident ray made with the normal. So I draw here the normal at point B and this angle is basically the incident angle. So it will be 90 minus 30, it is equal to 60 degrees. So the angle of incident is 60 degree, that is greater than 41 degree. So here we can see that the angle of incident is greater than the critical angle. So this ray will be reflected. There will be no refraction. So I will draw its path. So this is the reflected ray. And then it comes out just like the incident ray. So this is a complete path of this ray. Going towards the next part. Part 2. Calculate the refractive index of the glass. Here we have to find out the value of refractive index. When the critical angle of the glass is given, so we know that refractive index will be equal to 1 over sine function of critical angle. So I write here 1 over sine function of 45 degrees because 41 because 41 degree is the critical angle. So it comes to be 1.52 which is equal to 1.5. So the refractive index is equal to 1.5 and it does not have any unit because it is the ratio of same quantities. Question number 7. A loudspeaker produces a sound wave of constant frequency. Part A. State what is meant by frequency. So here we have to define the frequency. Frequency is the total number of wavefronts produced in 1 second. So I write here total number of wavefronts produced in 1 second. Is called frequency. Part B. The sound wave travels in air towards a barrier with a small gap as its center. Figure 7.1 represents the compressions. of the wave traveling towards the barrier. So here is a figure 7.1. We can see that there is a barrier and there is a small separation between this barrier, and these are the compression. While the distance between these compression is equal to wavelength that is represented by lambda here, and the direction of travel of this compression will be from left to right. Part first, state what is meant by compression. So here we have to define the compression. Compression is the region where the molecules are closer to each other or the region of larger pressure. So I write here part of the wave where molecules are closer together. Part 2. The width of the gap is smaller than the wavelength of the wave. So here I suppose that the width is represented by d. It is smaller as compared to wavelength lambda. It is given in part 2. On figure 7.1, draw the pattern of the compressions after the sound wave has passed through the gap. So here we have to draw the pattern of compression. Going back to figure, first of all I erase all of these, and here we can see that the wavelength is larger as compared to the separation or the gap between the barrier. So in this way the diffraction will be larger. It is only possible if distance is less as compared to wavelength. There is also second condition, that if the gap between these slits is greater than the wavelength, then diffraction will be less. Diffraction is basically the bending of wave front into the circular shape. So when these compressions passing through the barrier and it comes on the right side of the barrier, they bend into the circular shape. So I am going to draw here these compressions. This is the first compression, and we have to be very careful that the distance between two compressions must be same. It will be constant, it does not change. So you have to draw it carefully. So this is the second wavefront and there will be the third. So these are the compressions when this compression passing through the barrier and comes on the right side. We must be very careful that the distance between these must be equal to lambda and it remains constant throughout. Part 3. The barrier is adjusted so that gap becomes wider. Now the gap here is larger as compared to wavelength. Describe how this affects the pattern of the compressions after the sound wave has passed through the gap. So in this case there will be less diffraction. Here I write that if the gap is larger as compared to wavelength, diffraction will be less. It means that there is very small amount of bending in this case. I will write here there will be less diffraction. Going towards the next part. C. The frequency of the sound wave is 6800 Hz. The speed of sound in the air is 340 meter per second. Part first. Calculate the wavelength of the wave in air. Here we have to find out the wavelength of the sound wave by using relation that V is equal to F lambda. Here we have to find out lambda. It will be equal to V over F. So the speed is given, that is 340 meter per second, and frequency is given, that is 6800 Hz. So the value of wavelength comes to be 0.050 meters. The unit of wavelength is meter. So I write here part 2. State a typical value for the speed of sound in liquid. So the speed of sound in the liquid ranges from 900 to 2000 meter per second. I write here 900 meter per second to 2000 meter per second. Question number 8. A bar magnet is made of metal. Part A. Suggest a metal from which the bar magnet is made of. Here we have to tell the name of metal from which the bar magnet is made. So this metal is basically steel. I write here steel. Part B. Figure 8.1 shows the bar magnet being inserted into a coil of wire. The north pole and the south pole of the bar magnet are marked. So this is the bar magnet and these are two poles, north pole and south pole. And there is also a coil that is attached with the galvanometer. The coil is connected to a galvanometer. Part 1. Explain why the galvanometer deflects as the bar magnet is being inserted into the coil. So when we insert the bar magnet into coil, then the galvanometer shows deflection. We have to explain that how the galvanometer shows deflection. So first of all, we can see this figure. This is a coil and there is a magnet with north and south pole. So first of all, there is a small distance between the bar magnet and the coil. It means that the bar magnet is still not inserted into the coil. So when we insert the bar magnet into coil, it will be just like this. It has two poles. This is north and this is south one. So what will happen? Now we can see that the bar magnet is inside the coil. Then this magnet has some magnetic field lines that cuts the coil, which means that there will be the induced magnetic field in the coil. It means that if the coil here is north pole and here is south pole, so in this way this north pole repels the north pole of bar magnet, due to which the coil tries to oppose the motion of bar magnet. If the bar magnet tries to enter into the coil, so the coil induces the magnetic field that is of opposite direction as that of the bar magnet. In this way there will be the induced EMF in the coil, and as a result there will be the induced current, which is detected by the galvanometer, so that the galvanometer shows deflection. I write here, when magnet move towards the coil, coil will cut through magnetic field lines. The coil will generate magnetic field to oppose the motion of bar magnet. A voltage will be induced in the coil, creating an induced current that is detected by the galvanometer. So in this way the galvanometer shows deflection. Part 2. Explain what determines the direction of reading of the galvanometer. So here we have to explain that which thing determine the direction of the reading on galvanometer. So this basically depends on that which pole is entering into the coil. Here we can see that north pole is entering into the coil, and if I suppose that the deflection of galvanometer is in this direction, so when I insert the south pole of the bar magnet into the coil, the deflection will be opposite. So this depends basically that which pole is entering into the coil, so that the direction of induced EMF will oppose the change inducing it. So I write here, it depends on which pole is entering in the coil direction of the induced EMF will oppose the change inducing it. Part C. Describe a method for demagnetizing a bar magnet. So how we can demagnetize a bar magnet? First of all, from here, if we remove the bar magnet from the coil and decrease the current to 0, so that there will be the demagnetization of the bar magnet. I write here, by removing magnet from the coil, and decreases current to 0. So that the bar magnet get demagnetization. Question number 9, part A. The resistance of a circuit component varies with the brightness of the light falling on its surface. Part first. State the name of the component. So the component whose resistance varies with the brightness of light is actually LDR, that is light dependent resistor. I write here LDR, which is light dependent resistors. Part 2. Draw the circuit symbol for this component. So here we have to draw the symbol of LDR. So using the scale, I draw it. And also we have to show that light is falling on it. So this is LDR. Going towards the next part. B. Figure 9.1 shows a 6.0 volt battery connected in series with a 1.2 kilo ohm resistor and a thermistor. So here is a figure 9.1. We can see that the voltage of this battery is 6.0 volt and it is connected with resistance whose resistance is 1.2 kilo ohms, and this is in series with thermistor, and there is a voltmeter that is connected across the thermistor. Part first, at a certain temperature the resistance of the thermistor is 2.4 kilo ohm. Calculate the reading on the voltmeter. Here we have to find out the reading on the voltmeter, means that we have to find out the potential across the thermistor. Here we can see that this resistor has resistance 1.2 kilo ohms, while the thermistor has resistance 2.4 kilo ohm. So first of all, we have to find out the equivalent resistance of both of these components. It will be equal to R equivalent. We can see here that both of these components are in series. So the resistance of the overall component will be the sum of the individual component. So it will be all resistor plus R thermistor. The resistor has resistance 1.2 plus for thermistor it is 2.4 kilo ohms. So it will be equal to 3.6 kilo ohm. So this has total resistance of 3.6 kilo ohms. Next we have to find out the value of current that is passing through the whole circuit. So the current will be equal to, according to Ohm's law, that is V is equal to IR. And from here, I will be equal to V over R. V is given, that is 6.0 volt. And R we already calculated is 3.6. into 10 की power 3 ohms. So it will be equal to 1.67 into 10 की power minus 3 ampere, which is also equal to 1.7 milliampere. It means that current of 1.7 milliampere is passing through the circuit. Now we can see that both of these components are in series, and in the series combination the current remains same but the potential different changes. I write here in series combination voltage changes and current remains same across the all component. It means that 1.7 milliampere current passing through 1.2 kilo ohm resistor and 1.7 milliampere current also passing through thermistor. So here we know the value of current and the resistance of this thermistor, so we can easily find out the voltage, that is the reading of voltmeter. So again using Ohm's law, that is V is equal to IR. V will be equal to current is 1.7 into 10 की power minus 3 multiplied by the resistance is 2.4 into 10 की power 3, so that the value of V comes to be 4.0 volt. This is the reading of voltmeter. I write here it is equal to 4.0 volt. Part 2. The battery connected to the circuit in figure 9.1 is not changed. Suggest a change that could cause the reading of voltmeter to decrease. So we have to decrease the reading on the voltmeter. So what we have to do? We just increase the temperature of thermistor so that the reading on the voltmeter decrease. I write here increase the temperature of thermistor. Question number 10, part A. Describe the movement of charges that causes an object to become positively charged. So here we have to describe the movement of charges that causes the object to become positively charged. So if I remove the electron or the negative charges from the object, there will be the deficiency of electron, due to which the positive charge appear here. So if I consider that there is an object and there is another object, if I remove the electron from this object and shift here, so there will be positive charge because here will be the deficiency of electrons. Due to the deficiency of electrons, there will be the positive charge. So I will write here negative charges are removed from the object, then there will be the positive charge here. Part B. Figure 10.1 shows a negatively charged rod held over an uncharged metal sphere. So in figure 10.1 we can see that there is a insulating spot and an uncharged metal sphere. and there is also a negatively charged rod that is placed over the sphere. Part first. On figure 10.1, add positive and negative signs to represent the result of movement of the charges within the sphere. So going back here, we know that same charges repel each other while the opposite charges attract each other. I write here, same charges repel while opposite charges attract. So if this negatively charged rod brought near to an uncharged metal sphere, then what will happen? The negative charges of the rod will repel the negative charges of the metal sphere, due to which these negative charges move at the bottom of the sphere, leaving here positive charge. So in this way, the charges on the uncharged metal sphere appear. Because at the top there is a deficiency of electrons, due to which the positive charges appear here and the negative charges at the bottom surface of the sphere, because these negative charges are repelled by the negatively charged rod. So going towards the next part, B. Describe the actions that must be taken to obtain an even distribution of positive charges on the surface of sphere. So if again I consider that there is a sphere and it has positive as well as negative charges. So we have to make the even distribution of positive charges. How we can obtain the even distribution of positive charges here? I attach this sphere with the ground so that all the negative charges flow here and goes towards ground. Now when all the negative charges flow, then I have to remove this wire and there will be just a sphere with positive charges. And there is also a rod here that is placed over it. Then when there is only positive charges, I also have to remove this rod, so that by the removal of this negatively charged rod, the positive charge distribute evenly on the surface of sphere. So I will write here, with rod present, attach sphere to the earth, electron will flow to the earth, leaving positive charges there. Now remove the earth connection and also the rod. So that there will be the even distribution of positive charges on the sphere. Question number 11, Part A. A radioactive source is tested over a number of hours with a radiation detector. The readings are shown in table 11.1. There is a table 11.1 and we can see that there is a time, hours and detector reading counts per second. So first of all, when time is 0, then the count rate per second is 324. When time is 1, then count rate is 96. When there are 2 hours, reading is 39 and at 3 it is 23. So there are different readings at different times. We notice here that from 0 to 3 in this time, the reading of the count rate reduces very rapidly. First of all, it is 322 and then it becomes 96 and then 39, again 23. But from time 4 to 10, we can see that the decrease in count per second is very less. Means that here the count rate decreases but a very small amount. Use the readings to suggest a value for the background count rate during the test and to determine the half-life of the sample. So here we have to use this reading and find out the half-life of the sample. So from 4 to 10 time interval, these readings are the good for background radiation. I take the average and find out the background count. So I will write here background count will be equal to, I take the average of the reading from 4 to 10 interval. So I write here 21 plus 17 plus 21 plus 20, 19, 20 and 18, and total these readings are 7. So that there are 19 counts per second. Now we also have to consider the count reading from 0 to 3. So first of all, I make a table here in which I take two values, time and count per second. I draw here. There will be time per hour and here is count rate or count per second. So first of all, I write here time 0, 1, 2 and 3. No. The counts per second at 0 is 324. I have to subtract this reading, that is 19. That are the background count. So it will become 324 minus 19, which is equal to 305. Again I have to subtract 96 minus 19, it is equal to 77. And at 2 it will be 39 minus 19, which is equal to 20. And this one is 23 minus 19, which is equal to 4. So these are the counts per second. Next we have to do is that I consider 305 and then find out the half-lives. I consider 305. When first half-life pass, I write here half-life. Then half of this value remains. It will be 3 over 305 divided by 2. That is 152.5. Again, when 2 half-life passes, half of this value decays. So it becomes as 76. So we can see here that when 2 half-life passes, count rate is 77, which is approximately equal to 76. So I again consider 76 or 77, that is here. So when first half-life passes, half of this value decays and it will be 77 divided by 2. I write here that is equal to 38.5. Again, when second half-life passes, half of this value remains, which is equal to 38.5 divided by 2, which is almost equal to 20. So when the 2 half-life pass, half of this value decay. It means that there are total 2 half-lives. So I write here 2 half-life is equal to 1 hour. Because here time is per hour. That's why 2 half-life is equal to 1 hour. So we have to find out 1 half-life. It will be equal to 30 minutes. So the background count rate will be this one, 19 counts per second. And the half-life of sample is 30 minutes. Going towards the next part B. Hydrogen 3, that is tritium, has 1 proton and 2 neutrons. The nucleon number of tritium is 3. It decays by emitting a beta particle. Complete the nuclide equation to show this decay. The symbol X represents the nuclide produced by this decay. So first of all, it is given that the nucleon number of tritium is 3. I write here 3 and the proton number is 1. So number of proton is basically equal to atomic number. I write here 1. And beta particle is just like electron with atomic number -1 while the nucleon number is 0. So I write here 0 and -1. But I don't know the atomic number and atomic mass of element X, and I have to find out this. In order to find out the atomic number and nucleoid number of the element X, we have to balance the atomic number and nucleoid number on both sides of the arrow. So first of all, I write here atomic number. On left hand side of this arrow it is 1 and on right side it is -1, and if I suppose that it is A and B and I have to find out the value of A and B, so it will be A. Then the value of A will be equal to 1 plus 1, which is equal to 2. So the atomic number comes to be 2. I write here 2. Next is nucleon number. On left hand side it is 3. It will be equal to, the beta particle has nucleon number 0 plus B. So the value of B will be equal to 3. It means that the element X has nucleon number 3. By seeing this equation, we can say that the atomic number changes but the nucleon number remains same when element undergoes the beta decay. Next part, C. The arrow in figure 11.1 shows the path of 3 alpha particles moving towards the gold nuclei in the thin foil. So here is a figure 11.1. On figure 11.1, complete the paths of the 3 alpha particles. So alpha particle is basically helium nuclei with atomic number 2 and mass number 4, and these are positively charged. Second one, there is also the gold nuclei, and nucleus is also positively charged. So there will be the repulsion between the alpha particle and the gold nuclei. In the first figure, we can see that the alpha particle is coming towards the gold nucleus. It will be reflecting back. It will goes back. So it will be deflect in backward direction and goes here. Just like this. In the second figure, the gold nucleus is above, but the alpha particle path is below. It means that there will be the deflection and it will be just like this. For the third case, the gold nucleus is below and the alpha particle path is upward. So there will be the deflection again. But in this case, it is in upward direction. So these are the path of 3 alpha particles that are moving towards the gold nuclei.